Michael, let's focus in on those four areas that Alex was talking about. And we can see from the map here that Russia doesn't completely hold all four of those territories.
No, it doesn't. And it won't stop them claiming it, of course. But they're even in Luhansk, which they did occupy pretty well all of. They're now losing some of that territory and will probably lose a bit more. And down in the southwest, in Kherson, again, they certainly don't hold all of that. And they're losing more of that and may lose quite a lot of it in due course. So they're claiming, will claim sovereignty over territories that actually they don't even control. If we look at what's happening on the ground, we see the way the battle is tending to go, because the areas of Luhansk at present are likely to be surrounded to the south. Donetsk, the Russians are pushing back a bit at Donetsk, but they still have a lot of territory that they can't control. And it all comes down, incidentally, to a sort of a fairly key communication line. If you look a bit more closely at what's happening in the north, in the Donbass area, the Luhansk area, the line from Troitska to Svatove to Kremina, that's the main road. There's no other good roads there, and that's the main communication lines. Now, the Russians are digging in at Svatory, and the Ukrainians are pushing quite hard against it. This is the new battle. This is the area, having been pushed out of Kharkiv province, this is where the Russians are now trying to dig in. But the Ukrainians are very clear that they want to break that line, because that's the route to forces further south. The Ukrainians are almost now look as if they're beginning to surround Lyman. The Russians really need to hold Lyman, and they are under great pressure because the Ukrainians are beginning to get round the back of them. So Russia looks as if they can't hold these two lines, Lyman and Svatory in particular, they will lose quite a lot of territory. Meanwhile, the Russians really are counterattacking at Bakhmut. The Wagner group, the private military group that used convicts from the prisons, they've made some inroads at Bakhmut, and they've actually forced the Ukrainians back over the river, which runs through the middle of the city. But that won't do them much good. Even if they take Bakhmut, they're going to be outflanked if the Ukrainians are able to move further into Luhansk. So that's the battlefield situation in that part of the world. Whether the Russians claim it as Russian territory or not doesn't make any difference to what's going to go on here in the next week or two.
Well, let's pull out from the Donbass region and talk about the other referendums that are taking place, those areas.
Yes, I mean, in the south, in Zaporizhia and in Kherson, the demographic makeup is a little bit different here, because these people who live in these areas are not as naturally pro-Russian or Russian-speaking as they tended to be in the Donbass. Even in the Donbass, there's not many pro-Russians left, even if they're Russian-speaking. And the dynamics here will be different. There's a lot of civil disobedience and assassinations taking place in Melitopol, in Mariupol, in these areas of, and in Zaporizhia itself. And, of course, the Russians are now under pressure in Kherson, in that whole area where you can see the shaded area. That's the long front which the Ukrainians have opened up, and it will not be surprising if the Russians lose a fair bit more in Kherson. The other thing that's interesting is that Odessa is being repeatedly attacked now, which I think shows another phase in the war. The Russians are now, because their air force can't get at it really, and they don't have many precision missiles, they're starting to use the Iranian drones, these cheap Shahed 136 drones, as they're called. They're cheap, they're easy, they're not very sophisticated, but what they do is they fly around, they loiter over a target, and then they just dive on it and, as it were, commit suicide on the target. They're not specially powerful, but they are a problem, and they are now using them to attack civilian centres and rear areas behind the lines. The Ukrainians now need more air defence. They're beginning to get it now with some of these systems, which it's an American-Norwegian system called the NASAMS, which is the National Surface-to-Air Missile System. And these NASAMS and others like it are very important, because this is now a new air war that's starting between drones rather than missiles, because they're cheap and plentiful, and ground-based missiles that can start to shoot them down. And we'll see that develop probably quite a lot in the coming weeks.